It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Folks, I want you to welcome back to the program from the campaign trail. We've got Congressman French Hill is with us. Congressman, thanks for coming on this morning.
Paul, good to hear your voice. Glad to be back on. Glad you're feeling better.
Yes, sir, I am. I'm sorry about having to postpone our interview from yesterday, but I am doing better. I'm ready to really, see the Republicans win, see the Republicans keep the House of Representatives, to stop the phrase Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. I'm sure you're eager to do that as well.
Well, it wouldn't be a good thing for our country. It would unleash a lot of chaos. It would block every conservative mission that we've been trying to do, from regulatory reform to tax reform to conservative judicial work to reining in the administrative state to trying to rein in our domestic budget. All that would be thrown a terrible curveball, not only by having somebody like Nancy Pelosi as the speaker, but let me tell you something. I work in the financial services arena on Capitol Hill, and the committee chairman would be Maxine Waters, and I can't think of a more anti-capitalist activity than that.
Me neither. Yeah, that's terrifying. Congressman, let's talk a little bit first about border security. What are your thoughts about this caravan? What are your thoughts about troops to the border?
Well, troops to the border, as we have with our National Guards down there, they're doing reconnaissance work. They can be in a helicopter. They can do intel gathering. They do a lot of logistic support in terms of supplies, repairs. If we did have, as the president suggested, have to set up a tent camp for people attempting to seek asylum in the U.S., they could administer and help Department of Homeland Security do that. But the military people, both National Guard and Reserve and active duty, are not armed. They're not performing a law enforcement operation. So it's really in a support role. I think the president's trying to get out ahead of this curve. He's also trying to deter people from coming to the border in this way. If you want to seek asylum in the United States and have a legitimate asylum request, you ought to go to our embassy in your country and fill out the paperwork and propose asylum that way, or present yourself legally at a border crossing. But this sort of work is not constructive to any of those people in a timely way having their case heard effectively.
You kind of have they've not only forced President Trump's hand, but the country's hand as a whole. I mean, you can't have people set out, 2,000 miles away, say, we're coming and you're going to let us in. I mean, what is any sovereign country, supposed to do? But then to say, hey, we're not going to let you in. I'm sorry, because we can't set the precedent. We can't continue to have this happening to where we are just somehow, have this open border policy. Yeah, come on in. 7,000, 10,000, 20,000, we'll take you. I mean, so I think this is there's really no other choice if we're going to be a country.
And I couldn't agree more. That's why we have a broken immigration system. We have a broken border security system. President Trump is effectively trying to implement the border security and immigration reforms as outlined by Bill Clinton 25 years ago. This is not a new problem in the United States. It's just a problem that's gotten worse. We need more cooperation from Mexico. We need Mexico playing a much bigger role here. And this only empowers the cartels, which already control much of the territory in northern Mexico, in my opinion, because it just creates this major distraction, which allows them to increase their human trafficking and drug smuggling operation in the U.S. So this is bad on a lot of fronts.
Yeah, and I have to bring this up before we move on from border security. But the left and the Democrat Party, I mean, you don't hear them talk about it as much anymore, but they want to abolish ICE. They think Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is somehow the enemy of the American people. Respond to that, Congressman French Hill.
Well, I've been endorsed by law enforcement here, the Fraternal Order of Police. I believe in law enforcement. Back in June, Democrats would not support a resolution in the House simply to support the Immigration and Customs Enforcement function. It was just a simple thank you resolution and supporting their efforts. We've had a border enforcement arm in this country since the 1890s. This is a standard function of our border security and our internal enforcement of illegal aliens. And we can't get the Democrats on board with it. My own opponent was at an Abolish ICE rally and said, when asked by somebody, what is it? He says, I don't know what ICE is. I mean, it's ridiculous. We need to stand up for the rule of law in this country, and we need to enforce all our laws. And that's why my opponent also has said he thinks sanctuary cities are a good thing. This is eroding the rule of law, and that is something I think America is, over 240 years, the best known for. Our legal judiciary system and our rule of law here. So I'm shocked by the transition to the Democratic Party from strong borders, legal immigration improvements of the 1990s, led by Clinton as president, to now an open border, no law enforcement. Why are we trying to enforce the law party? It's a horrible outcome, and I don't understand why anyone supports that, or how they can garner any support for their political position.
Yeah, I really just think I agree with you, and to me they've just gone so radical, and I think it's because this is the easiest way they see to maintain or to acquire power is just to kind of go with whatever the far left in their party is promoting at the time. And I think we saw this with the DACA children and the DACA problem, where President Trump actually, to my dismay, he was willing to give them what they wanted as long as we got border wall funding, was willing to basically give a type of amnesty and, a process. And the Democrats, they rejected it because, number one, they don't want Trump to get credit for solving the problem that they say is some massive problem. And number two, I think they'd rather have that segment of the population as victims so that they can, exploit those victims for political power. And I think the Democrat Party made a conscious decision to reject Trump's offer.
100% conscious. I mean, this was led by Chuck Schumer. He shut the government down over it. As you say, Trump proposed a compromise on Dreamer kids for a comprehensive set of changes. Number one, move to a merit-based immigration system instead of only broad family unification. Two, get rid of the diversity lottery system from the very early 1990s, and build this Southwest border protection system of technology, barriers, and personnel that President Clinton outlined as an important national need. So, yes, he did compromise. And guess what? The Democrats walked away from it. Schumer made fun of it. He shut the government down over it. And that kind of cynicism is what turns off American voters. And the Democratic Party is out of touch with the American people on the need for fixing our broken immigration system and creating a Southwest border security system that county judges, local policemen, the Border Patrol, and the American citizens will accept as doing a good job.
We're talking with Congressman French Hill. Want to shift the conversation to the tragedy in Pittsburgh, the synagogue, 11 people dead. You have an anti-Semitic, murderer who apparently thought that Donald Trump was being controlled by the Jews. What were your thoughts when you heard about this terrible tragedy?
Heartbreak, number one, and I really appreciate Rabbi Barry Block here in Little Rock having a large, well-attended ecumenical service here to pray for the victims in Pittsburgh. Governor Hutchison was there. Senator Bozeman and I attended, Lieutenant Governor Griffin. It was a heartwarming event because there's no place in anti-Semitism. My father-in-law was a U.S. Army captain in April 1945. He was the U.S. Army officer that walked into Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany to free that camp. Patton came the next day. The furnace is still on. The body's still stacked. I mean, this is a horror that America has fought a war to reject. There's no place in our society for lack of religious tolerance. I've been in Egypt trying to get President el-Sisi to support our Coptic Christians and treat them with more respect and dignity in Egypt. I've worked with the Hungarians on rebuilding Christian villages over in Iraq. We must have religious tolerance. We must preach that as Americans, not just abroad, though, in our own country. And there's just no place for this sort of horror. So it was a sad day. That is my response. A very sad day.
Well, and you would think, of course, no, you wouldn't think. And in this day and age, with the way politics is, with the vitriolic hatred for the right, for Donald Trump specifically, of course, they tried to say that this was the president's fault. They tried to blame it on speech. You even had some people on Twitter, some people on the left say, well, this is what you get for moving the Jerusalem. Was it really worth it to move the embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? Somehow, again, making this the president's fault. And it's just, we've got to get to a place, Congressman Hill, I'm sure you would agree, where we just don't want to win at all costs. You know what I mean? Like we want to make a political victory out of everything that's whether it's good, whether it's a tragedy. Enough's enough,
Well, Steve Scalise didn't go out on the national media after he and a dozen of my colleagues were gunned down by a crazy Bernie Sanders supporter in Alexandria, Virginia, and blame the Democratic Party or Bernie Sanders or Nancy Pelosi about the crazed mania of that guy in June last year. It's ridiculous. The hypocrisy is dripping. And so I'm with you on this. We've got to get out of this sort of behavior. It's adolescent, juvenile, back and forth behavior, and return to the love and affection we have, as Americans for each other. Let's debate these policies. Let's debate them on the policy point.
Yes.
And I go back, and I tell you, Barry Block, the rabbi, did a great job. He quoted George Washington's famous letter, I think from 1790, to Jews in America. And I commend that to all your listeners to read George Washington's own words. And one thing that struck with me, he said in it, to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. And it was a beautiful letter about America's commitment to religious freedom in this country. It's a founding tenet of our country, and no better espoused than our first president. So this Twitter storm, this cable TV nonsense is not constructive to building a better country.
We're talking with Congressman French Hill. Tell me about the national park backlog. I know you're involved in trying to solve this.
Yeah, well, Bruce Westerman, who represents our great state in House, is on the House Natural Resources Committee, and there have been some real issues about wildlife conservation to help our hunters, our fishermen, our wildlife up and down the Mississippi Flyway. And also in our national park system across the country, we have a large maintenance backlog. Just you can imagine that over the 100 years of the park system. So we have a constructive bill that will take part of the oil and gas royalty revenues that the Interior Department gets now from leasing our oil and gas operations on federal lands and make sure that's used to keep up this national park backlog and also use part of it for wildlife restoration. This is a good way a conservative way to maintain our obligations there and enhance those assets, but without burdening the taxpayer in a bigger way.
So we're kind of winding down the interview here. People got to go vote. I mean, we can sit here and we can talk about why the country needs to keep moving in the trajectory it is now, but that's not going to happen if people don't get out and vote, especially in your district, District 2.
I'm telling all my constituents, I'm telling voters across the state of Arkansas, we are better off as a country than we were 2 years ago. We're better off in national security. We're better off in regulatory policy. We're better off individually with lower taxes, keeping more of our earnings. We're better off with the growth rate in the economy, over 3% compared to 8 years of Obama, under 2%. Wages are growing at their fastest rate. And if we want to keep that national security focus, keep that economic growth focus, have conservative judges on the Supreme Court, reduce the size and complexity of the federal government's power and administrative state. We need to hold the House and Senate. And so this is not an academic exercise. We need voters, particularly here in Arkansas, but across the country, to hold the House of Representatives by Republicans, and that will allow us to let President Trump and the House and Senate Republicans keep moving forward like we have the last 2 years.
Congressman French Hill, I wish you the best of luck in this final stretch before November the 6th. I know early voting is still going on. Get people out to vote. People, you got to go vote. And Congressman Hill, thanks so much for coming on the program this morning and using this platform. All righty. Thank you. Yes, sir. You too. Folks,